We're constantly trying to do new things on the Spen and Nick show. This week we did something new. You're gonna see that it didn't work out that well. But hey ho, we're gonna learn from it. There's still some amazing content on this episode. We're gonna keep going, we're gonna keep learning, and we hope you keep enjoying it. Oh, and by the way, don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. Welcome to episode 16 of the Spen and Nick show. This is the coronavirus episode. We're back in our houses. We're doing the remote call, but we're still super excited, aren't we, Spencer?
We're so excited. I just figured out that this is episode 16, which look at that a different way, and that's the end of the second series of an 8-part series. So this is end of the finale of season 2, which has got to be a massive show. This is big.
I reckon we should be eyeing up a Netflix series already.
Yeah, exactly.
And
what do we know at Netflix?
That sets us up well for actually the next episode, which we'll be talking about Netflix a little bit.
Yeah, perfect. If only we'd segued into that one straight away. We missed an opportunity. We need to somehow weave in Netflix into the next show as well.
We will. But this week, we're talking about learning to think different. We're talking about Instagram carousels. We're talking about design.
You got it. All those things rolled into an amazing show.
And so I'm excited because you've been absolutely smashing Instagram. You've been consistent and you've been brilliant. And there's some kind of, what are the words? What did you call it? Learning principles. What are you calling them, Spencer?
Oh, mental models.
Mental
models. Yeah.
So you've got a few mental models you want to share with us. Do you want to go for it? Well, first of all, do you want to explain what a mental model is? Because I clearly don't know.
Yeah, I think break those words down. So a model, we're all familiar with what models are. We did them at primary school when we were kids. We were kind of modelling with clay or whatever. And model is just a representation of something in reality. A mental model, of course, is a model that you have in your head that enables you to frame the world in a certain direction or think of it in a certain way. So I think of mental models as the ability to look at a certain situation through a certain perspective, through kind of almost like a certain pair of glasses that you're putting on that kind of shape how you see that world. So if you're putting on some yellow glasses, you're going to see all yellow. But if you're putting on a certain mental model, you're going to view that situation in a certain way. And there's literally hundreds of these different mental models, different ways that you can view the world. So it's a really simple thing, and we use them all the time. This is the kind of weird thing that mental models seem like a bit of an abstract concept, a bit of an unknown, but actually we're constantly using them. You've been using them today, Nick. We've probably everyone listening to this has been using mental models. You just don't think about them actively as mental models. Mm-hmm. Does that make sense?
Makes sense to me. That sounds good. I think probably the best way as well to understand it even better is to probably break down a few, right?
Absolutely, yeah. So you're right. I've been doing these Instagram carousels, and I kind of carousels has been something that I've been wanting to do and have been doing off and on for the past few months. I'd probably say, I don't know, since we've been doing the show, which is like way back to November, I think. So maybe 3 or 4 months. And I was just doing them every now and again, maybe one a week, one every couple of weeks, and not really getting into this habit and forming, the ability to do them quickly. Because I was taking so long, maybe like 5 or 6 hours per carousel. A carousel, of course, is a collection of 10 different slides, really, on Instagram that enables you to tell a story or to kind of get over a different concept or a specific thing that you want to kind of talk about. A lot of people just do carousels from 10 different pictures together. But actually, if you can use them to tell a really great story and a great narrative and talk about a specific concept. So I kind of stumbled into doing this daily because I found a few hacks and ways to do them really quickly, much quicker than I was doing them previously. And that was largely based on the structure. So one of the big things was that I often try to overcomplicate stuff. Okay, and this will come full circle, by the way, into a specific mental model in a minute. If you're wondering where we're going, I often overthink things. I often try to put in multiple complex concepts or theories into one cohesive story. So I might be trying to mix two different things together in order to kind of figure out what a new thing could be. It's a good way to do innovation. It's a good way to think when you're trying to come up with new concepts and ideate, taking something that exists and something else that exists and see what forms out of the middle of it, kind of remixing it. But it's actually really complicated when you're just trying to get across one story, and you're trying to build a bit of a habit and a community around some of these concepts on Instagram. So yeah, I've been doing them every day. I've also been supplementing them in between with some design work. So I've been doing 2 posts on Instagram every day, just trying to mix in some of my learning that I'm going through, learning Illustrator and some design concepts with the carousels and stuff as well. So that idea of me going through too much complexity, adding too much complexity into a lot of the stuff that I do, was one thing that drove my productivity on Instagram. And this comes from a mental model that we're both really familiar with called the Pareto principle. So the Pareto principle here is, I did an Instagram carousel about it. It's a way that you can be way more efficient. And I reckon you can be 5 times more efficient. And so often and this is true, I do get asked, like, how do you do so many different things? I'm doing the podcast, I'm a CEO of a company, I've got other side projects, I've got a family, I'm doing design stuff with my kids, I'm doing all of these different projects. How can you get all of this stuff done? And the crux of it is that I use this mental model called the Pareto principle. Quite actively and quite consciously now, and whereas previously I was doing it unconsciously. And what the Pareto principle is all about is it's a 20-80 rule. So the belief is that the theory is that if you spend 20% of the time that you would allocate on making something perfect, just spend 20% on it, then 80% of the work is going to get done. And actually, when you think about it, 80% is probably good enough. And so there's a couple of principles here that good enough is good enough. You don't need to try to be perfect. If you're trying to be perfect, then the chances are that you're going to procrastinate, that you're not going to ship that thing, you're not going to unleash it into the world, and you're going to kind of be hamstrung by yourself, by your own perfectionism. Whereas if you're just focusing on getting it finished, getting it done to the 80%, to the good enough kind of standard, you can ship it. And that means actually it's only taken 20% of the time. It's 80% of the time that gets it to perfect, which is crazy because that's the bit that's not needed for most projects that you go through. So the Pareto principle is really simple. Spend 20% of the time that you would normally spend on something trying to get it to perfect. You get 80% of the results. You can ship it, let it go, and you can move on to the next thing. Dead simple. What do you reckon about that?
I think it's fantastic, and something that I heard recently at a workshop on self-promotion was that they applied the 80-20 rule in a way that I hadn't really heard before, and that was you should spend 80% of your time making it good enough, but then 20% of your time telling people about what you've done. And I thought that was absolutely fantastic, because it's not really it's distorting the 80-20 rule, really. And in fact, it wasn't mentioned as Pareto's principle. Right. But I think it's genius that the concept of spending as much time as you can, spending enough time making it good enough, and then also allowing or allotting time to be able to share it with people. Because if you don't share it with people, you can't expect people to understand, because accomplishments don't speak for themselves. So it's really important that you do that extra time to spread the word.
I think it's a really good point, because and what I take from that is, if you've got to understand what your objective is by doing this thing in the first place. If my objective is to be able to do an Instagram post every single day, I need it to be as efficient as possible. But if I don't publish it, then I've failed completely. Like, I haven't even got 1% towards my goal, because the thing is about publishing. It's about sharing it. It's about getting it out there as quickly as possible. The biggest failing that we go through is not shipping. It's not getting it out there. It's not telling the people that you've done this thing. And so I think you've got to think of your objective. Now, conversely to that, I spend about the same amount of time doing a one image design post on Instagram as I do a 10 image carousel on Instagram. But the reason for that is that I've got a completely different objective. What I'm doing with that is I'm learning different tools and I'm learning different bits about composition and form with design work. So actually my objective is not to ship it and not to get it out there and to try to raise my profile through design. This is about me learning, but actually documenting that learning process as I go. So it's a completely different objective here. If the point is getting it out there, then go for it as quickly as possible, but make sure you spend quality time telling everyone about that you're doing it as well. I think that's a key thing. Great thoughts. And like, I wanted to use that as an example for what a mental model is, because it's one of the biggest reasons that enables me now to do carousels every single day. And I've only been doing this for like, I don't know, 8 or 9 days. So I'm not into this like well-formed habit at this stage, but I've now got it to a point where it's easily a part of, I can make it easily a part of my everyday plans, everyday work. So that's pretty cool.
And it also applies to lots of other contexts, I suppose, as well. I think we've naturally, because we do our workouts together in the morning, and I think naturally, like I think the amount of time we spend on those workouts has come down, but I think the impact of those has still stayed high. And I think in a way we've unconsciously applied the 80-20 rule. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think you're right. I was going to use another analogy. We've kind of gone for high impact energy food, or like the thing that's going to give us the most impact, the most bang for our buck with those workouts. So we're trying to do it higher intensity, shorter period of time, but we're still burning, maybe the same amount of calories or whatever, and we're still having the same impact. And actually, the really important thing for our workouts there is that we're doing it as a habit again, and we're doing it, and we're showing up, and we're turning up with the right focus. So I think it's totally what we're doing. And it can be applied in so many areas of life, right? What was that? Sorry.
Consistency is the key.
Consistency.
That leads me on nicely to a point or a mental model that I learned from Alex Icon, who I bumped into a couple of weeks ago. He talked about this thing called QVCA, and it comes from, or the acronym comes from the sales channel called QVC. And so
the shopping channel. Yeah,
shopping channel. There we go. And he's come up with this thing called QVCA, which is about how to sell without being a sleazy kind of salesperson. And so he says, first of all, you've got to go for quality content. Yeah. So that's absolutely like vital to what you're doing. However, he also says that the quality doesn't need to be too high either, because particularly if you're creating videos or whatever, people get really engaged by content that's kind of natural, that's kind of spur of the moment, that's even just done on your phone. So don't try and overproduce, but equally don't try and underproduce. But there's like a nice happy medium that you can hit. Next one is value. So you've got to bring value in your videos. It's no good just trying to sell. You've actually genuinely got to share something that's going to be helpful for the people watching the video. Then C, and he says this is one of the most important ones, is consistency. And that's what you're showing very, very well. And then the final one, he talks about authenticity. You've really got to be authentic, and that comes across well if you are. But if you're not being authentic, it's quite easy to tell. So going through that kind of like thinking about QVCA as a mental model can really help you create better quality content that can help you connect better with your audience, which I think is absolutely vital. So I think that's something that you're definitely doing with the content that you've been creating on your carousels.
I think that's such a good framework. And again, I think it is a mental model. It's the way that you want to view your content production, And what I think about when you say quality isn't necessarily amazing production values, animations, flashing, blah, blah, all this. It's just about good quality sound, good quality audio for video stuff. Audio being so important, but again, the video needs to be high enough quality. But the consistency is the big thing. Well, I've got a question, because you've reminded me of something else, and I know we're kind of jumping around a bit here. This idea of authenticity. I was at a recent meetup it was broadly about kind of organizational psychology and organization design, and how you can the particular focus was around kind of psychometric testing within organizations when they're hiring or when they're looking to promote people or whatever. And one of the points that was made by this like professor was that the myth is that leaders should be authentic. And he believes that leaders shouldn't actually be authentic to themselves. And he gave an example, and I think you can always figure out examples that prove one thing or another. But he said, who's the most authentic leader that we've ever had, particularly in the 20th century? And Hitler was the person that he kind of talked about, right? Because he was totally true to himself. You know, he did everything because of his passionate beliefs and whatever, rightly or wrongly, depending on what. But he was a pretty authentic leader. And so his point was actually, you shouldn't be authentic. You should be business driven and more focused on what the company should do rather than what you actually believe as an individual. Now I'm sat there or stood there listening to this thinking, everyone around me is from a big corporate, you know, they work in the HR function in like talent leads or whatever in big corporate environments where this may well be the case, where their leaders are not necessarily fully authentic and they probably believe all this thing. Me, from more of a startup and kind of an entrepreneurial background, I'm like, mate, that is complete and utter bullshit. I do not agree with that at all. I think that all leaders need to be authentic. I don't know, but what's your position and what's your thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think, well, if you want someone to be able to last for a long time, for example, in a startup, if people are not being authentic or true to themselves, I think they're going to burn out faster and they're not going to last a long time in the company. So ideally, you want people that feel comfortable being who they are at work and at home, and can kind of like, it doesn't mean that they have to be the same person in both places, but we've got multiple different versions of who we are, and they need to, and whichever one turns up at work, that one needs to be one of them that they feel comfortable being, because if they don't, it's not going to work, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that's entirely fair. It's something that's kind of, it was only really after the event that I really started to think about it and started to disagree with more actually that this guy was saying throughout the evening. But yeah, just interested about that authenticity. It's definitely the case for content, you know, for the kind of media that we're creating, the content that you're creating. You want to be showing up with your true self, because that's the thing that's going to make people attracted to what you've got to say and kind of believe you and want to follow you on this journey and hopefully become some kind of fan. So awesome. That's I think that's such a good reminder around that idea of, you know, the coming all the way back to the QVCA model. I'm going to try and remember that, and that's really cool. Can I give you another mental model?
I think we've got to, because I think we've undersold ourselves here. Sorry, we've oversold ourselves by offering. We've overpromised and underdelivered on the amount of mental models we've covered. So go on, give at least one more.
Okay, so I'll try and do a couple then. In that case, a bit quicker than I was doing. Than we've done that other one so far. So I'm going to talk about Occam's Razor. Okay, so Occam's Razor is it's a really old mental model, an old kind of way of framing a situation in the real world. And the actual kind of phrase that we use with Occam's Razor is, I'm going to read this out, I've got it on the screen next to me, so if I just have a look at this now. It's, among competing hypotheses, the one with the fewest assumptions should be selected. Now that's quite a mouthful, and actually it's kind of ironic that Occam's Razor is all about simplifying the message, simplifying the assumptions, but actually that's quite a complex statement. So I'm going to make it a bit simpler and make it a bit more Occam's Razor-like, which is basically the simplest explanation is preferable to the one that's more complicated. So to play this out into what this actually means, often it comes back to the thing that I was talking about earlier that I do all the time is overcomplicate things. But the simplest way to get something across is going to be the one that works. We know it in marketing, you know, instead of all of I think gone are the days when you kind of baffle people by bullshit. And that's what encourages them to buy stuff. Now, that's definitely the case in some worlds that we've both been on the periphery of. I definitely think it's the case with a lot of strategy consultancy that happens. You see these really complex designed frameworks and like ideas for how the company should move forward, and everyone goes, wow, look at that output, that must be worth a huge amount of money. But actually in that complexity, what that complexity means is that no action is really taken. Very often you see these amazing things, but no action is taken. And so that complex situation never results in any high value and any actual value for those organizations. So it's the simplest explanation is the best way to do it. So there's this great thing called KISS. It's basically another workup of this same concept. KISS is keep it simple, stupid. Okay, so that's what that acronym stands for, KISS. In other words, we use this in UX design all the time, where we try to keep things as simple and straightforward for the user as possible. We want to try and avoid or minimize the friction that it takes in order for a user to carry out a specific action. And UX designers all over the place are totally familiar with this, but it's not often seen, it's not even used in other parts of businesses. But yet it happens in nature all the time. You can see the streams that carve through landscapes because they're following the simplest path. You know, that is something that happens in nature, and it's something that happens all over the world. And what we need to be doing is making sure that we can apply some of these things to the stuff that we're doing as well. So keep it simple, and that's basically Occams Razor.
I quite like what you talked about with rivers. I think we could go into that a little bit deeper. Because are you saying that a river typically starts high up in the mountains, or water comes down from the mountains and then goes down to try to find the ocean? And typically it will try and find the straightest route to do that. But also it negotiates the kind of like hard rock versus kind of like kind of easier types of or materials that get in the way. So it's more likely to go through kind of like mud than it is to go through hard stone.
Yeah.
And so are you saying that in life, when we're trying to achieve our goals, we should try and find the most direct route but equally takes into account what is the challenges or obstacles that are in the way? And so we try and actually go for the simplest obstacles to get to where we need to go.
Yeah, I think with the river analogy there, we talked about the goal of the water getting to the ocean, right? But river doesn't think, and therefore it doesn't have these goals. All it cares about is flowing through the easiest path, and it's driven by forces, the forces of gravity, but it's driven by certain forces which make it go downhill. But what it will naturally do is try to avoid or work around the hardest thing. It will try different approaches, different places to get through to a lower ground until it finds the one which is the easiest to work through. And then as it makes that first break, that first inroad, I think then it becomes easier and easier and easier, and that's where the streams are really formed, because it's on that constant flow. So I think there's a whole load of other concepts that can come as a result of this. What it makes me think about is testing hypotheses, trying lots of different, almost like a hacker mindset. A hacker isn't someone who sits in the corner of a room with a hood up over their head on a green screen doing one thing. A hacker is someone that might try 100 different approaches to try and get someone's details or try and defraud someone. A hacker would send 1 million emails to someone to try to get one person to buy it. So they're trying lots of different things. And this is kind of how I see the river flowing. It's trying lots of different things and then finding which is the easiest one and the simplest route and that's the one it goes for. So I think it's less about goals. There's another concept, so I think we're talking about, again, more mental models here. There's another one called obliquity, or the idea of taking an oblique route rather than a direct route. And this is a really good one because I think it relates well to the rivers and the easiest, cutting through the rock in the easiest way. When you think about the Panama Canal, goes through Panama, obviously. Panama is the quickest way, and it was cut out of the rock, out of the land, in order to get ships to go through the Pacific Ocean across into the Atlantic Ocean, or the other way around. Now, the direct route would have been way harder because you would have cut through much more land. You would have cut through mountainous ranges, and you wouldn't have been able to cut the canal in anywhere near as much time as they did, coming back on themselves. So we want to go this way. What Panama does is actually comes almost 180 degrees back on itself in order to go back fully. So it's like an S if you're taking a shipping route. And that's a really good example of taking an oblique route towards a direct goal. And there's loads of instances in business where this works out in a really good way. Rather than having a goal of saying, I want to make X number of millions of pounds this year, actually, if you want to, an oblique route to doing the same thing is, I want to impact this many people's lives. I want to change this many. I want to make, I want more people to get this product rather than think of it in a direct way to get more money. And I think that's a kind of a similar concept or a lead on from this mental model. So we've just talked about Occams Razor. We've covered another 3 different mental models. That's how many there are out here.
Can you summarize the ones that we've covered today?
We've covered Pareto's principle. We've covered Occam's Razor. We've covered obliquity. We've covered QVCA.
Whew.
We've covered right, and another one that I just mentioned that I just can't quite remember.
You mentioned obliquity.
I mentioned obliquity.
Occam's Razor you've mentioned. You mentioned Pareto's principle, QVCA.
And hypothesis-driven thinking, I think, is another
one.
As well.
Wow. So if you're listening or if you're watching this, don't say we don't give you anything, because we've just given you 5 mental models there. I think that's a good place to end the show for today.
Can I give you one more? Because this is a little bit of a... I'm doing this carousel right today on Instagram. This is a little bit of an experiment for me. Test something. I want to see what your view of this
Give
is.
us a bonus. Give us a bonus. Go on.
Here's the bonus one. And this is another razor. So this is This is called Hanlon's razor. And Hanlon's razor is... I'm going to paraphrase this rather than give the exact definition, but essentially that which you should attribute, that which could be attributed to malice, should actually be attributed to stupidity or incompetence. Okay, so very quickly, imagine you're in the car and you're coming to a roundabout, and you're on the left-hand lane, but you're going straight on. Someone in the right-hand lane comes ahead and cuts you up, like drives out in front of you, nearly takes your front bumper off, and you're like, really angry, like hate it when people cut me up. What people do is people shout out of their window and they call that driver all of the names under the sun, and they believe that they've done it on purpose to try to really piss you off. But the reality is they're just doing something stupid. So most of the time when you feel like you're being hard done by, we would think this person's out to get me. They're doing this purposefully to disrupt me. They're doing it out of malice. The chances are they're doing it out of stupidity, not malice. That's what I want to leave you with.
So think the best of people.
That's it. Think the best of people. I think specifically though, when you're hard done by, just pause for a minute and think, actually, what are the reasons that they're doing this? Are they just doing it from incompetence, or are they doing it from deliberately trying to get to me as an individual person? Probably it's the incompetence.
I'll tell you what, that's got to be worth a like or a subscribe. If you've got any value from this episode, please do subscribe. Help us out. Just press that button. We'd really appreciate it. Maybe even give it a like, maybe even give it a share, but please do give it a subscribe.
That we would love.
So I think that's it for this week's episode. I'm looking forward to seeing you in episode 17 of the Spend and Nick Show. Unfortunately, we can't do our now signature high five. So,
do you know what we should do? We should do a cheers. We should do a cheers.
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 I've got some what's the stuff from the kettle? in the bottom of my
Oh, lime scale.
lime scale, which wasn't too nice there.